But my beats, they are hard.
Of the BCSN. This is a BCSN conversation that I am having with Dr. Yanela McLeod, Director of Communications, Social Sciences, Arts, and Humanities at Florida A&M University. Yanela, hello, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Great. And in all honesty, Dr. McLeod and I knew her as Yanela. We were at FAMU around the same time, traveling in similar, we probably know similar people, definitely, in different circles, I'm sure, but definitely I remember you on campus as a Rattler, and, obviously I started in broadcast. You were in broadcast and journalism, correct?
Yes, I was. That was my undergrad.
Yeah, and then I moved over to SBI, and they kind of held me hostage over there, so I never kind of got back to where all the fun stuff was happening. So, but we have very similar experiences through our time at FAMU, right. And the whole purpose of just why we're having this conversation is Yanela is actually the producer and director of a up-and-coming documentary on Jake Gaither, the legendary head coach of Florida A&M University, one of the winningest coaches in Black college football, just in football in general. And I'm going to kind of just, because I don't want to mess this up, but I'm just going to kind of read from the website. And the website, gaitherstory.com, gives the description about the documentary that Yanela is working on. This is a 1-hour documentary called Changing the Game, the Jake Gaither Story, which shares the civil rights legacy of legendary Florida A&M University head football coach Alonzo S. Jake Gaither, who skillfully, without contention, championed social change by using sports to improve race relations in and beyond the state of Florida. Special cinematic emphasis focuses on the iconic coach's private campaign to organize and play the South's first integrated college football game on November 29th, 1969, which just happened to be 50 years ago, this past November. Right. In that game between Florida A&M and University of Tampa, the Rattlers emerged victorious 34-28 in the historic game that helped debunk a number of long-standing racial myths about Black athletes, Black coaches, and race relations between Florida's segregated population. So all of that, you can go read gaitherstory.com.
Jake Gaither Story. JakeGaitherStory.com. JakeGaitherStory.com.
I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, JakeGaitherStory.com is the website. And I mean, so look, there's a lot here, and I think part of, when I first, and I'll be honest, when I first, right now we're in sort of in this COVID-19 world, and everybody's watching things on television, and sports documentaries seem to be on everyone's mind. I remembered seeing this first announcement about this documentary, I would say back in January, from a blog post, Rattler Nation blog post, a great blog for any Rattler out there. If you're not reading or following on Twitter or watching or online reading, it's a great blog post. But that's where I first learned about this. And so, with everything going on, I'm like, let me reach out and then, I'm I saw that you were the director and the producer, and I was like, she looks familiar. But anyway, I know she's a Rattler, so let me go out and reach out. And so after all that talking, you know, I want a lot of things I want to talk to you about, Yanela, but let's just kind of start with the idea behind this documentary, and maybe give me, before we get too deep into you and how it came about, just give a little background on where this started for you.
It started for me pretty much as an intern during my college years up here at FAMU. I interned with Roosevelt Wilson, who was my professor at the time in journalism, a very critically acclaimed columnist. He was the publisher and owner of the Capital Outlook newspaper, and he was an endeared professor in the School of Journalism, and at the time it was graphic arts. And so I interned at the Capital Outlook newspaper, and just one day during that internship in his office piddling around, I ran across a manuscript that said Agile, Mobile, Hostile, the Biography of Alonzo S. Jake Gaither. So I just kind of asked him about it. Prof, what is this about? You know, everyone knew the name Jake Gaither on campus. That was a part of your freshman orientation. You learned about him. We've got the Gaither Gymnasium in Tallahassee. There's a golf course and a community center. You know, Gaither is a legend here. And so he talked to me about it and told me that, you know, he and Coach Gaither were very close, and he wrote his biography with Gaither dictating his story to him. And he spent many, just hundreds of hours over the course of a couple of years interviewing Coach Gaither. And I was like, this would be an incredible story to be seen visually, because I was in broadcast journalism. And so my context was often that medium. And so we were studying documentaries at the time. And I said, this would be a great documentary. And so that's where the seed got planted. Never did anything with it, but it never went away. And anytime I ever thought about an opportunity to tell a story and tell a compelling or a good story, I always came back to Coach Gaither because of the magnitude of who this man was. And so that's where that seed was planted.
And so this documentary is in large part based from this manuscript, which later the manuscript was written in 1976.
Correct.
And so, you know, Coach Gaither retired as the coach at Florida A&M in 73, I believe, correct?
He retires as coach in 69, but he was also the athletic director. So he retires from his administrative position in 1973. And that's when he was full. You know, at FAMU, I don't know a single soul who worked one job. So Coach Gaither, he was the dean of men. He was the head of the physical education department. He was the athletic director. He was the head football coach. I mean, you know, he had a number of hats. And so he's going to lay down the administrative part in 73 and go on to the house.
Yeah, and it should be noted, prior to that, he was also the head men's basketball coach.
That's how he got to FAMU. A lot of people don't know that.
So the manuscript, which led to the book, the manuscript titled Agile, Mobile, Hostile, the Biography of Alonzo S. Jake Gaither, and that's you holding that, the book. So
this is the Bible, the Jake Gaither Bible.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because that is interesting to me, because the manuscript was written in 76. You came to FAMU and discovered that, I would imagine, sometime 20 years later. And then we'd almost say 20 years after that, it becomes a book. Talk a little bit about that journey just to get it to print.
So it was a 40-year journey for Professor Roosevelt Wilson, and we call him Prof. Unfortunately, we lost Prof last year, and Prof was someone who was more than a professor or even my boss as the publisher of the Capital Outlook. We really became family. So he is like my second father to me. And I say my dad got me to age 18, and then Prof took it from 18 on up, you know, and helped in those developmental years into my adulthood. And so Prof is really like my father, and that's where my heart lies. And he and Miss Wilson, you know, they took me in as a part of their family. They've got 3 wonderful kids, Van, Vaughn, and Tiffany, and they're like my surrogate brothers and sisters. But anyway, So Prof, I ended up working for Professor Wilson at the Capitol Outlook for about 5 years as the senior reporter and associate editor of the Capitol Outlook newspaper. And so I kind of, was encouraging Prof to not give up on the idea of publishing. But for him, he'd written it in 1976. He and Jake Gaither had the same kind of relationship that Prof and I had. It was this mentor-father type relationship. And Gaither was someone who was like a father to him. But life just kept getting in the way. Prof, you become a father, and then you're a professor, and then you're running a newspaper, and you're a columnist. And so it kept getting put on the back burner. Well, Prof is going to retire in 2009. And some health concerns led he and the family to make the decision for him to sell the newspaper and retire. So he was home. And at this time, he had lost his sight. He always struggled with his sight. And actually, that's how he and I came to even know each other and become close. He would tell the story that I saw him struggling in class one day after having eye surgery. And I was like, well, let me help you. And from let me help you, I would read the students' work that they turned into him, word for word, line for line, punctuation included, to help him grade. And he would direct me on grading. So we developed that's where the mentoring started. And I get to hear his thoughts and that kind of thing. Same kind of thing when we were at the Outlook. I would help him with his column. He'd write them, I'd read it word for word to make sure there were no errors, et cetera. And I got to really know his brain. When he retired and he's home and he lost his sight, not his vision, but his sight. I would go out, once a week and read to him and read his columns to him, et cetera. And we had decided that he wanted to put a book together of his columns called Against the Grain, because we know that Roosevelt Wilson had a powerful voice when it came to that newspaper. And he really moved and influenced a lot of people who were in the power structure on behalf of the African American population. That's his advocacy, was through that newspaper. And while going through this big billfold of his columns, again, some kind of way Jake Gaither popped up. And I asked him, I said, Prof, whatever happened to the manuscript? He couldn't find it. It had been packed up in storage. And I said, you know what? There have been several people who have written books about Jake Gaither, and they've used portions of your manuscript because he was very generous that way. Samuel Friedman wrote an incredible book called Breaking the Lines. And he's looking at the civil rights impact of Black college football. And Professor Wilson allowed him to use his manuscript as a reference. Eddie Jackson wrote a book called Coaching Against the Wind about Coach Gaither. He used some of the manuscript as references. We have people as recently as Derek White, I think I got his name right. He wrote a book, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He's also going to reference the manuscript. And I told Prof, enough. Other people are using your work because it's incredible. You need to do the same. And at this point, we had the benefit of self-publishing through independent publishing options like Amazon's createspace.com. And so I know layout and design and all of that. And I said, Prof, we're going to get this book published. Enough is enough. I'll do it. And so his daughter, we were able to track down the manuscript. We found a copy of the manuscript. Mr. Friedman had a copy and shared it with us. His daughter got it scanned. I did the editing, the layout, the design, got a former student of mine who became like my son, to do this beautiful cover, the front and the back cover. That's Sean Woods, and he owns Sean Woods Media now. And we just decided that the time had come. So in 2018, we put the process together, and in 2018, we published the book, and it came out to tremendous support and interest. And so Prof had his first book signing on January 15th. And it was the Martin Luther King holiday. We had it in the historic Jake Gaither home that has been preserved here in Tallahassee because of a contractor named Cornelius Jones and his wife. They happened upon that house, and Cornelius saved it. And so they allowed us to have it there. And so that was probably a long way to tell the story, but that's how it came to be. It was just enough was enough. I was never going to let that manuscript get lost again. And Prof deserved it. And so when we put that book in his hands, he couldn't see, but he felt it, and he turned those pages, and he exhaled, and he said, that has been a 40-year exhale waiting to happen. So it was an indeed honor and a privilege to be able to help my dad, my mentor, cease to close that chapter. And people just love the book. It's incredibly written. It's an easy read, and it's super compelling.
Yeah, no, I've got to. I mean, I had heard and read bits and pieces of the other books, and shamefully, I, did not know. And I say shamefully because I mean, with so much going on, I don't know how I looked past this, but I had not read the book until we had our conversation. And so after we initially talked a week ago, went on Amazon, purchased it. I've been reading it on my Kindle off and on. And I will just say for any, not just any Florida A&M fan of athletics, football fan, I would just say anyone who has an interest in Black college history, Black college athletics, I think this is one of those books that you have to have on your crazy little mantle place. Like if you have a little book, like, if you've got a bookshelf, you've got to have this on the shelf.
Gotta be on.
Because it is a great read. And I will say for those of us who were fortunate enough to know, I did not know Prof as well as you and many of the other students that I like I said, I was there at the same time, but I ended up going over to another school. But I always knew who Prof Wilson was. That first year when you come into FAMU in journalism, you kind of know who he is, and you probably end up reading the Capital Outlook. At that time, you did, and you kind of learn things, and you learn a little bit about the history of Tallahassee and just the history of just Florida A&M through. At that time, you had to go do microfilm and microfiche stuff, and you just learn about the history. But there's so much in here that is really a cool. I have to call it cool because it really is a throwback, a little nostalgia for me as I'm reading it, but also for anyone who's interested in that period of time and finding out how we got to where we are today. This is the book, and it is available on Amazon. And so through the magic,
it's available on JakeGaitherStory.com and GaitherStory.com. Gaither Story is the website that we put for the book. And so, GaitherBiography.com. And
okay.
so GaitherBiography.com, JakeGaitherStory.com. And the thing is, once Professor Wilson, like I said, we lost him a year ago, even before he stopped doing book tours, and he said he would like the book to be used to raise money for FAMU athletics. And so his children, after his passing, established the Roosevelt Wilson Endowed Scholarship Fund, and 100% of the proceeds go to the athletic department at FAMU to help provide scholarships for those students. And so if you're someone who just wants to give back to the university in a way, you can purchase this book. It's $25. And after shipping or whatever, that money goes straight to the athletic department.
And I just want to read, I highlighted something from out of the preface that Prof had written here, where he says, the book shares the intimate dynamics of Gaither's life, not known to the general public. No other book has told his complete life story based on Gaither's own personal accounts of experiences that led to his rise as a coaching giant and iconic leader. The book is also unique, and that includes rare photographs from Gaither's personal and professional life. And it does make mention that this is the official biography that was actually authorized by Gaither himself.
Absolutely.
So, and so Prof Wilson and Gaither coming together is kind of interesting in itself, because, here was Prof Wilson, who at the time in the late 60s, if I have the history right here, was a journalist, ended up finding his way to Tallahassee, ended up becoming the sports information director at Florida A&M.
Correct.
And it was through that role which he actually met Coach Gaither and sort of got the stamp of approval from Coach Gaither, who, you know, as he says in the book, he wasn't getting that job if Coach Gaither doesn't sort of give him the thumbs up. I'm curious how they became sort of, you mentioned that mentor-mentee relationship. Are you able to share anything about how that developed over that time to him actually writing that manuscript?
Yes.
Because
no,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, Professor Wilson at the time, he was a reporter for the Ocala Star Banner, and he was their first African-American reporter. And so his job was covering sports, Black college sports, high school sports and Black college sports. And so Eddie Jackson, who was the vice president of communications here at FAMU, was looking for someone to fill the position of sports information director. And so he had been someone who read Prof's writing in the Ocala Star Banner, and liked his coverage. And so he reached out to him to offer him the job, but he had to get the approval from Coach Gaither. So Prof comes up to Tallahassee, and he interviews with Gaither. He was nervous because it is the Jake Gaither, yeah. But he was really taken back at how we made Gaither a legend, someone who was bigger and untouchable or unreachable, but Gaither was very humble. He was a very humble man who was very different. Prof tells the story that when everybody else was driving a Cadillac, Gaither was driving a Lincoln, you know, that kind of thing. So when he comes in as sports information director, he has to work very closely and very directly with Coach Gaither, who was still athletic director. Prof's going to come in 67 or 68, I think. And Gaither's going to retire a year or so later. So Prof works very closely with Coach Gaither as it relates to Florida A&M University athletics. And so Gaither's going to mentor him in the history of athletics at FAMU, because remember, Gaither was the athletic director. Okay. And so, so Prof learns from him. He gets to sit at his feet. He's going to eventually, Prof becomes athletic director.
Right.
And so all of that comes from the apprenticeship that he had with Coach Gaither, and learning about the business of the game, and learning about the heart of the game, the students, how you take care of them when they come from these places all over the world. And so he just spent a lot of time with him. And we call this book a historic treasure because we published it as it was written in 1976. So right. It is a special moment captured in time. And so you hear Gaither's voice. But Prof would tell you that he decided to write a book on Coach Gaither because there had been another book that had come out, and I think it was written by George Curry, who was a very, very acclaimed African-American journalist. And Gaither did not like the book. Okay. He felt it did not capture who he was, and he was a little disappointed in it. And so Prof was compelled to fix that heart pang for this man who was like his father. And you got to understand, Coach Gaither sells Professor Wilson and his wife their first home in Tallahassee. He vouches for him at the time during segregation and coming out of the end of segregation. Black people couldn't go to the banks and just get a loan. They had to have someone vouch for them. And a lot of times it was another white person or a white man. But Gaither's word was so strong in the business and the political community, he could vouch for people. And Gaither would only vouch for people who, you know, had integrity. So he and Prof vibed on that integrity aspect, that fairness aspect. He helped him get his footing. And so he commits himself to writing this book to correct what he felt was a wrong. And he got it once the book was written. I mean, he spent hours and hundreds of hours in that home interviewing Coach Gaither. And once it was written and Gaither was able to read it, he loved it and approved of it. And, you know, it just never got published, but at least he saw it and gave it the thumbs up. But just working closely together, people who have similar and like interests, like characteristics, that's how they developed that kind of relationship.
So and I guess so many different things that I know we've talked about, and just that I know I had jotted down from the book, but as a filmmaker, as you know, you deciding to make this documentary, there's so much here. There's so much information that you have access to. Talk a little bit about the process of what you are going to or encapsulate in this documentary, because I think in kind of talking, there's it's obviously, as mentioned in the description of the documentary, it centers around that historic game, but there's so much other stuff here as well. Talk a little about that process and the challenge that comes with narrowing down what you want to present in this documentary.
Yeah, and with the Coach Gaither, there are 1,000 ways to tell a story about him, and 1,000 angles. And so you just have to pick one that you feel a connection to. And I'm a trained journalist, but also a trained historian. And those are two disciplines that run in tandem. I mean, journalists are the historians. What we write today is history tomorrow.
Wait a minute. Say that again, because I don't think when people think of journalists, they seem to have a negative connotation, or maybe people forgot what journalists are supposed to be. Say that one more time for everybody, please.
If I can remember what I said is, I think I said that, journalism and history are tandem, and because journalists are historians, what the news we write today is history tomorrow.
Amen.
And so we capture the stories and the developments that people look upon in order to make decisions or maintain connections. And so for me, combining those two professional aspects of my life with also my deep-seated passion about advocacy for African Americans, because we've been through so much as a people. And one of the things that I see is our stories get tossed to the margins of history because people don't care about them. Mm-hmm. And it is up to us to care about our history and to be the custodians of it. And if we do not tell these stories, they will get lost. Mm-hmm. And to me, where there is no history, there is no people, because there's no evidence. And I just refuse to allow people like a Coach Gaither or Roosevelt Wilson or even a Garth Reeves, who I wrote a book about. He was the publisher, the owner of the Miami Times, to get tossed aside because their contributions helped change this world. And they use their platform to improve the lives of African Americans and to move humanity forward, to tell people we are people who are deserving of being treated like human beings, and we're going to do our part to make sure that our people are treated fairly. And so the impetus for doing this particular documentary is to elevate Coach Gaither to current sports history where he belongs. Right. And Coach Gaither was not a good Black coach. Coach Gaither was a good coach. And he used his coaching position to advocate and advance the lives of African Americans and humanity. And so he's the perfect encapsulation of what my heart feels. And so I wanted to tell a story from a perspective that people don't really see Coach Gaither, and that is his civil rights advocacy. Coach Gaither had tremendous influence among white politicians here in the state of Florida. And he will use and execute that influence behind the scenes to safeguard Florida A&M University's autonomy. And it is no secret, he had more influence than the university's presidents when it came to protecting this state-funded institution. FAMU's caught between a rock and a hard place. You're in the period of segregation where you're getting all of this legislation that is discriminatory against its people. But then you need the same legislators to fund you. And so they had to walk a very fine line. And because of Coach Gaither's integrity and his incredible ability to tap into the kindness of people and to move their consciousness, he was able to get a lot done for Florida A&M University. And so I just don't want that story to be lost. And I don't want Coach Gaither. There are so many students on our campus today who have no clue who Jake Gaither is. And that is our fault.
Yes.
Because if we don't tell the story, they won't know. They know they go to Gaither Gym, but they don't know who Gaither is.
Right.
And so if we do nothing but educate the people who put their feet on this soil, on this hill, then we have done a good job by continuing that legacy and making sure that his stories and other people like him do not get disappear into the annals of history.
Wow. That, see, I when you say that, I recall that first semester class where you had to go, and I you know, forgive me, I don't know if they still require freshmen to take that.
It was freshman orientation when
freshman
we were.
yeah, where you had to learn. Yeah, you had to learn about Florida A&M, and you had to learn how to sing the alma mater. You had to learn how, you know, what these buildings were and who they were named after. And even if you didn't know all of them, you knew half of them. You know, it's like
you knew the one you had to go into every day, Sybil C. Mobley, School of Business and Industry.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You know that you knew the gym and you knew the stadium, who were they were named after, and things of that nature. Yeah, that's kind of depressing to hear that we've lost telling our story a little bit.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KEAVERSVOICE.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Talk a little bit about, and I know through this documentary and as you're putting it together, what's one or two things about Jake Gaither that you want specifically to come out of this, that you want people to remember, recall, or maybe if they didn't know, find out about?
Well, we want people to really appreciate the sacrifices that a Coach Gaither or the effort that a Coach Gaither gave toward helping his people. And we want people to know Coach Gaither as someone outside of he's not just a coach. And so we want to be able to show Gaither the man. And if you talk with any of his players who are around today, they will talk to you about how Coach Gaither used football to develop manhood. Because he knew he had to get those young men ready to go into a very hostile society, which is much like there's an opponent on the field. And he was trying to give them the tools and the equipment to maneuver down that field, to become a good father, to be someone who'd be able to provide for their family, someone to be a good citizen, someone to go in and get into leadership positions to make a better way for others. And so that aspect of Coach Gaither, the man, is something that we really want to convey to people. And this is just an ordinary man who finds his way to football really by accident. And he becomes the winningest coach of his time, Black or white. He's the first to reach 200 wins in his era. And his record, 203, 36, 4, that was just unheard of. And we're talking about a time of Bear Bryant and Willie Hayes. And so these people would come to this campus to learn from Coach Gaither and to share. These coaches would share their techniques and their ideologies. So just to see really his big influence outside of the FAMU universe and how much of an impact he's had on generations of lives, because I guarantee you, there are some little boys out there who are now, some grown men out there who are probably named Jake because one of his players or someone who, he trained and mentored honored him in that kind of way, And so we really want people to know about Gaither the man, his impact, and his influence on so many lives.
Before I ask a little bit about the actual game, which is another part of the documentary, you had me thinking about, and I read through reading various parts, there's so much in here that he thought about as it relates to integration, segregation, how he saw young Black athletes, that would be how they would be viewed, treated, used by what, I guess, for lack of a better word, segregation or desegregation was going to bring. That he was, I'm just going to read this quote. I thought it was interesting. One of the quotes within the book was, he says, quote, "I know segregation is wrong, and I'm not advocating it, but I also know integration, as it is implemented today, is hurting more than it is helping Blacks. Integration itself is right by its implementation, excuse me, let me make sure I read it right. Integration itself is right, but its implementation is wrong." Now, as I read that part in the book, and I'm just going to encourage you, buy the book, read it, find out where this is, and you'll understand where my thoughts go here. I had to imagine this was, at least I originally thought this was maybe him talking to Prof in the sort of early 70s. But as you and I were talking, you were of the thought that it might have been more so in the 60s when he had this thought and other thoughts about where he saw desegregation going and what it was going to mean for the young men that he was coaching and talking to. And also, let me say, Yanela, he also talked about how it would affect educational leaders, Black principals, teachers, how they would get moved to the side. I mean, it was like mind-blowing as I'm reading it. But when you, as you put this together and you read it, what era or when did you think these thoughts were in Coach Gaither's mind? Was I off on that time period?
Well, probably not. You know, he's going to retire in 73. And so, you know, they started doing the book before then. So I would say it's late 60s, you know, I would say late 60s, probably after the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act have occurred, 64 and 65. And so integration is going to hit pretty much in the 70s, in 1970. So I would say anywhere between 68, 69, he's probably having this conversation. But Gaither, people came to Gaither all the time to get his perspective about what all of these political changes, the impact that they would have on Florida A&M University. Because you're talking about integration and ending segregation, and FAMU is the state of Florida's answer to the federal mandate to provide an opportunity for African Americans, right? So you've got this Black institution that we are founded in order so Florida would not be out of compliance with federal law. And so there's this kind of precarious nature about FAMU, and people were always thinking about its legacy. And so, you know, we're going to be founded in 1883, but during the period of segregation, that's what Florida's answer was. Like, we're not racist. You know, we've got a school here, and they are happy they can come here and get their education and go somewhere else. So that's when we were meeting the Brown versus Board kind of requirement or mandate. But anyway, people would come to Coach Gaither because this is a Black institution that's publicly funded. And he, like many people, could see around the curve. It's not the idea of integration or desegregation. That has to do with human dignity. Absolutely, segregation needed to fall, and integration needed to be reached for. But the implementation of integration, Black people were not saying, close down our institutions and let us go to white institutions. Black people were saying, let us maintain and grow our institutions and not prohibit people of any other color or race or whatever to come here, and vice versa for what we want. If I want to go to law school and I feel the best law school is in Michigan, then I should be able to go, you know, or I mean, not Michigan, Gainesville, I should be able to go to that law school, that kind of thing. And so the way integration was being implemented to me, and I think to people like Coach Gaither, was intentional sabotage. This is paying you back for fighting for your rights. And so his concern was at these Black high schools and these Black middle schools, they had Black teachers and Black principals, and the leadership was there, and and Black coaches, and they cared about the full well-being of the child, getting a full education, being able to develop into a great athlete. Because you, like Coach Gaither would say, he took many average players, but they were able to put the time in to develop them to be great players or great athletes. For him, he saw integration for integration's sake. Take Black kids, put them in white schools, take white schools, put them in Black schools, and say that's it. Gaither would tell you, I don't want a poor playing white athlete in my program. He needs to be good. And other colleges, they don't want just any type of Black athlete. They need to be good. The disconnect there is who's going to care for the heart of the matter, who's going to care about that athlete. And when you pull them out of those institutions, now they become commodified. You can take him and go earn a whole lot of money for your institution. When he's dried up, or when she's dried up, you're done with them. And that was not the case at HBCUs. And so Gaither was concerned about the well-being of the athlete and the mental and the emotional safeguarding of the athlete, and not someone who could just be used in order for an institution to reach its financial goals or its athletic goals. And so he was very clear about it and very upfront about it. And quite frankly, people knew how integration was being implemented. And we have suffered as a community because of it. And so you're just trying to make sure that folk understand where Gaither really cared about his boys. They call them Jake's boys. It wasn't about how fast they can run up and down that field. It was about developing the whole child, the whole man. And if you look in that book, Bullet Bob Hayes, who comes from, a difficult life, Gaither's going to take him under his wing, and the coaches, Coach Pete is going to take him under his wing. Willie Gallimore, all of them found a father in Coach Gaither. And Coach Gaither's concern was when they go off of here and they go into these institutions to be the token, they won't have that father figure.
That's it's so interesting. I'm one of those people that believe, if you were great in your era, whether it be in the 50s, 60s, you would be great in today's era. I think that's a lot. You have a lot of that going on these days. As if you spent time watching the Last Dance documentary, and we get into these debates about historical players from one era and how they would do in this era. But I think the same sort of applies to coaches, because one of the things that you said in there, the good coaches are the coaches that care.
Yes.
And I think that's one of those interesting things that he brings up through his conversations with Prof. Being able to sort of care about the whole student, mm-hmm. and not just the athletic side. And it was the athletic side that even today, you still see many students who leave as the, I won't use the term, I love the term that he used for the elite Black athlete, I love it. But those elite Black athletes are still going other places looking for something, and then they sort of realize, not all of them, but many of them realize it's not there. And so you'll have guys that will now transfer back to an HBCU like FAMU or another school, and their experience is totally different because, you being a professor, having been a professor on campus, you understand the care that, everyone has for the student, the whole being of the student, versus just what this means to us as in terms of generating dollars, generating exposure, generating marketing value, branding, so on and so forth, and winning games. All that stuff is nice, but it's not really what matters in the long run. It's about the student.
Yeah, we at FAMU, we have our motto, it's excellence with caring, and that has never gone away. And, you see it even more now with COVID-19. We're trying so hard to make sure we don't lose students on the wayside, because of the transition. But, it's a tough decision for a very skilled athlete to make a decision when finances are a part of that decision making. Because a part of integration what impacted our institution too was the financial resources that we had access to got usurped, right? And so it's difficult to convince a young man or a young woman to look past the resources that are available at other institutions and make a decision to come to an institution that has everything else except that. And so we've got to figure out a way to strike a balance and make sure we're able to provide the resources for those talented students, whether it's athletics or academics, in order to continue to have our HBCUs thrive. But it was a balance that Gaither figured out how to do. And by the time, integration hits, he's old and he's ready to go to the house. And so he leaves the position, but he never leaves he remains an advisor. People could tap him for his wisdom. Right.
Transitioning over to the other part of the documentary, which is the game, the game that took place 1969. If I want to say, if I have the date right, November 29th. I got that right. November 29th, 1969. Only reason I remember that is because I was just reading that he won his 200th game on November 15th, 2 weeks before that game. So that's why I was kind of doing the math in my head. I don't know if you can see that on the screen. But, for many, and again, full transparency here, for many people, when you talk about the history of the game or games that integrated football in the South, many people go to USC at Alabama on September 12th, 1970. And that's where USC on the road, I don't recall if O.J. Simpson was with USC then, but I just remember, and this even from my father, I remember my father telling me this story. USC comes to Alabama with black players who weren't even allowed to use the same bathrooms as their white teammates. And those anyway, USC ends up putting a whooping on Alabama, 42-20, something like that. And that was the last time Bear Bryant had a team without any black players. That's how that story goes. So, but that is sort of revered and talked about as the integration game. But actually, through what you brought out, and maybe I'm sure people knew, but it wasn't very well talked about. This game on November 29th, 1969 was actually the first integrated game in which Florida A&M played the University of Tampa. And maybe it's because Tampa doesn't have a program anymore. Maybe that's why it kind of gets lost in history. But, that game was the integration game, so to speak. And Tampa was a well-regarded team at that time. Florida A&M, of course, coming in with Jake Gaither, 200 wins, well-regarded, well thought of, well-known. What's your thoughts and what kind of interesting tidbits did you find out about that game as you were doing the research and hope to sort of present in this documentary? And
so, this is going to be the first game between two Southern universities. And so you've got FAMU, which is the black college, and the University of Tampa, which is a white institution that had begun to put some black players on their team. And during this game, I think they had 3. And McLeod he was well sought after. As a matter of fact, he had told Gaither he was coming here. And, but Coach Fran Kersey in Tampa was at Leon McQuaid's mama's house every day saying, he could stay home if he goes to University of Tampa. And so, what boy doesn't love his mama and say, I'm going to stay home with mama. So anyway, there's a whole side to that. But the interesting thing about this is a few things that I learned is as we change, as society changes or has changed throughout the years in helping African Americans get grounding in society with full equality, right? It's not just a Black effort. And so there have to be people of good conscience who are of a different faith, who are of a different race, to make this kind of thing happen. And it just so happened that this game and this story would be very different if there was not a coach, Fran Kersey, at the University of Tampa, someone who was raised in the North and had played with Black players. And he's going to be a transplant. He comes down to Miami and plays for the University of Miami. He eventually is going to coach over there at some point too. But it's those type of dynamics when you see two good people just doing the right thing. And so as it relates to that particular game, what's so interesting about it is University of Tampa was ranked 6th in small colleges. And I think FAMU was ranked 16th. And in this particular season, they both had only lost one game. And this game between FAMU was going to be the University of Tampa's last game. FAMU had another one after that to go and play Grambling in the Orange Blossom Classic. And so these were two really good teams that were going to go head to head. And what a lot of people don't know is Coach Gaither spent 2 years behind the scenes lobbying the state legislature to get permission to play a white college, because he wanted to prove to people that Black people, when it came down to it, they were superior. Not saying we were equal. He's saying our little Black school is superior to these white schools. And there's no way for us to prove it than to do it. And so I think he was thinking, I'm getting ready to retire. I've spent my 25 years doing the best I can, but I don't want people to see me as just a Black coach. And I don't want people to see these boys on this field as just good Black players playing other good Black players. So there was this idea about changing and shifting the tide of racial ideology of the time. And so he's very intentional, and he will finally call in a favor for himself, because he typically used his influence either on behalf of the university or his boys. And he was like, I'm getting ready to check out from, meaning check out as retire. And I want to show you how good we are. Let us play a white school. And so there's a couple of schools, that are bounced around, but Fran Kersey, who was about 25 years younger than Coach Gaither, they had become like collegial friends, because Coach Gaither and just like other coaches would go to these coaching clinics, and he met Kersey there and they got to know each other. And so they're playing one game, and Kersey happens to go to Gaither and say, I want to play you. And Gaither's like, could this be it, God? Like, is this the time? Because Kersey had no idea that Gaither was behind the scenes lobbying for this effort. And so Gaither takes some time, and he's gonna take him up on his offer. And if you watch that game, I have spoken to people, this is 50 years later. They remember the clothes they wore. They remember how old they were. They remember who they sat next to, because they got suited up to go to this, got bow ties, and, they put on their Sunday best. And this is something that is a part of the psyche of people who participated in this moment in time, both Black and white. And so it's a very special moment. And if you ask these people who were spectators, this was a nail biter, and it was back and forth, and it's going to come down to a final play. Comes down to a final play, and then FAMU will emerge victorious. But when they did that, they finally were able to really tear down some historic racial myths about African Americans. The prevailing thought at the time was Black coaches did not have the acumen to stand up against a white coach. They did not have the intelligence and the depth of thinking in order to do it. Black quarterbacks were not intelligent enough to be able to quarterback a team against a white team. And at that time, Black quarterbacks now, they don't have an earpiece in their ear with a coach calling plays. They've got to go out on that field and make the decisions based on how they were coached on the field at home. And so we've got Stephen Scruggs, who was the quarterback at the time. You know, he was really developed by Coach Gaither as well. And so he's going to flip that ideology on its head because he was a lightning whiz on the field. And then the other thing that this game is going to show is in a divided and segregated space, that Black and white people could come together without hostility and contention. This game is played in Tampa. 2 years before, there was a race riot in Tampa. And so the news of the day was, if you allow these Black people and these white people in this stadium in a heated environment of a football game, you're going to have a race riot. So they had police out there, everything. Not a single issue of racial tension broke out during this game. And so what the people in those stands showed America was, we are better than what you are telling the world we are. And we are people who are ready to move past these divisive lines that are keeping us from being the America that we really could be. So it's just a really beautiful way of encapsulating much of all of Coach Gaither's impact and influence: the politics, the father, and the man, the coach.
I thought one of the interesting reads from the book was how he mentioned he did not want to make, well, I guess there's two things. One, that he didn't want to make that game more than what it was. I mean, obviously you knew, as you just described, you knew the significance of the game, but at the same time, he wanted to make it, Coach Gaither, he wanted to make it a normal feeling game to his players. He didn't want to make it the Super Bowl. He didn't want to make it more than, hey guys, this is another team, another opponent who puts their uniform on just like us, you know, that kind of coach speak. And, you know, we're going to go out and do our best. And he didn't want to over sensationalize it to the fan base either, you know, so that the fans weren't, you know, very much, you know, unfortunately, thankfully there were no message boards back then, you know, because you know how we get if Southern's coming to town, you know, so we, you know, if there had been message boards, God knows what would have happened, you know, so you know, he didn't want to create any of that. And so
he wanted to put that pressure on his boys because he wanted them to be as mentally clear as possible to play this tough opponent. And so he knew the significance of the game and winning it. Right. And so did his coaches, because he had an incredible team of coaches, but they shielded the men from that. Those young boys didn't put that pressure on them. Just go and just play the best game that you can play with against, like you would anybody else.
That's great coaching, great fan base there. I mean, anybody who was there, and there was something like 45,000. I think obviously I read in one of the news clippings, 45,000+.
About 47,000 people.
Wow, that's an amazing crowd and an amazing visual. So I mean, that's one of the things I'm definitely looking forward to seeing come to life. And I think the other thing I came out of it, he mentioned that this game almost happened a year prior. As I guess some of that, you mentioned some of the politicking behind the scenes. It was talked about making it part of the Orange Blossom Classic.
Right.
And but he didn't want to take away from the Orange Blossom Classic, which was a classic tailored towards, you know, two Black college opponents. Correct. He didn't want to take away from that event and wanted this to sort of stand on its own. So I thought that was some genius marketing there by genius marketer. I think you got to be able to market your program back then. I mean,
very shrewd, very brilliant, very wise, and very humble.
Look, I've taken up a lot of your time. I know, like I said, we could talk for days, or at least I could. But I'm so fascinated at this project. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure we emphasize and help out, because I know the financing of this project is a major task and a major venture. So talk a little bit about that, and how can people help support this project so that it gets off the ground. I won't say it so it gets off the ground, but so it can be completed as you intended it to be completed?
Yes, so thank you for that. We have to raise about $250,000 in order to tell this story cinematically the way that it deserves to be told. Because if you're going to tell the Coach Gaither story, you cannot come half-stepping, right? And so, so what we did on November 29th, 2019, the 50th anniversary, was we launched the website, jakegaitherstory.com, to let people know about the project, officially know about the project. And we launched a fundraising campaign, an Indiegogo campaign, where people could give as little as $2 and give as much as whatever they wanted to give, the whole $250,000 if they wanted to. And so within a matter of a month or so, we raised a little over $5,000. And so that let me know that there was an interest and there was support for this. And, you know, funders want to know that people want this project. And so I fancy myself as someone who could do many things well. Asking people for money ain't one of them. So I am completely outside of my comfort zone, but I have to do it if I want to be able to tell this story the way that it deserves to be told. So we have on our website, you can support it. You can click a link and you can donate. We have different levels and tiers of perks that you can get based on your donations, everything from a shout out on social media to producer credit, to t-shirts and that kind of thing, to just try and raise the money. Now we've raised enough money to where we're able to produce a short in order to enter into film festivals. And you know, that's where funders are. And so we're applying for grants and, you know, all types of funding opportunities in order to get the money that we need. I by no long shot am a fundraiser at all, but I do have the conviction and I have the sense of urgency for telling our stories and telling them well. And I hope through conveying that it will come through and we'll be able to identify some people who would financially support the project at a major way. One of the benefits of this project, though, is I'm working with a small but mighty team. It's 7 of us at this point. We've added another cinematographer. But these are people who I've worked with either in a capacity as a faculty member, or they used to be my students. And so, or they were my professor. And so these are people who I have a long history with, and we worked on different projects together. And they are just as supportive and as interested in getting this project done. And so they're lending the best that they have to offer to make it happen. And so we've got, I don't know if you asked me to mention people who are on the project or not.
No, please mention. Yeah, I want to make sure you mention them. Yeah.
So we've got on the project, I hope I don't forget anybody. So we have as a co-producer now, and he was coming on as creative, as technical director and creative director, but he's gonna add to that hat co-producer. Kenneth Jones, Professor Kenneth Jones is a professor in the School of Journalism and Graphic Communication here at FAMU. And he is a filmmaker. He's made a number of films, independent films, and the one that he's most noted for, and documentaries, and the documentary he's most known for is the documentary on Rosewood, Florida, that small township that experienced that horrific and terroristic period of history where that town was burned down because of the lie of a woman who said she was raped by some Black teenagers. And so he will produce that documentary, and that documentary was used as the basis for the film Rosewood. And so he just knows what he's doing. And he's, you know, we've long said we would work together, and now's the time, and thank God for that. We've got Elizabeth Merle Dawson, who was the interim director of the historic Black Archives here on campus for 13 years. She was trained by Dr. James N. Eaton, who founded that Black Archives. And Dr. Dawson is a professor of African American history, but she is the repository of Florida A&M University history. She knows it. It lives in her heart. She sleeps and breathes it, right? And she's an amazing storyteller. So she's on the project as co-writer and co-producer. Doc and I have written some things together before, so I'm happy to work with her on that. The lead cinematographer is a young man named Sean Woods, who's the owner of Sean Woods Media. And he was my former student who became like a son to me. kind of like I would be his prof to me, you know what I mean? And so an amazing cinematographer, photographer, he just, you know, he just does incredible things with the camera. And Gerald Tooks, he's a local videographer here too, but his specialty is aerial cinematography. And so his work helps to add some depth of interest to the story. We brought on another one of my former students named Jadon Sweet, who's another independent film producer, and he's won a number of awards, film festival awards, and so he's going to be working on the cinematography side. And then for marketing and branding, Gina Kinchlow, she's a professor here in the School of Business and Industry, and she is a public relations guru. I mean, this thing just, PR lives in her bones, and she's so immaculate at what she does. And so we just feel with that team and then with the support of people that when we tell we're working on this story and they give us access to resources, that we're really on the road to producing a very quality product that will make people proud, that would make folk who know Jake Gaither and Florida A&M University proud to see this story told.
Wow, it sounds like a good team that you have. You know, that's a good group that you have working with you, and you know, you got to surround yourself with good people. So let's make sure we give the website again. That's jakegaitherstory.com.
Correct.
That is where you can go to not only support and donate to the documentary, but it's also where you can see some of the background and some of the early work that's already been done. You can learn more about the team as well, more about Jake Gaither, just in case if you don't know. But for the in-depth, you know, background on Jake Gaither, I got to encourage you to first, I don't know if this is like 1A and 1B, so I don't want to say first, but let's just say 1A and 1B. You know, go donate some money to the actual documentary, but then you got to go purchase the book. I mean, the book, again, Agile, Mobile, Hostile, the Biography of Alonzo S. Jake Gaither, can be found on Amazon, anywhere you can probably purchase a book, I'm sure. But if you go to Amazon, if I heard you correct, every dollar goes towards the, make sure to give me the scholarship fund that it goes towards again.
Okay, so it's the Roosevelt Wilson Endowed Scholarship, and that's to support scholarship for athletic scholarships at Florida A&M University. You can get that book at GaitherBiography.com. You can get it at JakeGaitherStory.com, and you can get it at Amazon.com. And so, you know, that's just the generosity of his kids and his wife, Roosevelt Wilson. They just want their loved one's legacy to continue to fuel what he loved, which was athletics at Florida A&M University. FAMU, you know, Prof was the athletic director, the sports information director. I mean, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, you know, at FAMU for his support. So it really means a lot. Yeah, no, this is a must read for every Florida A&M, not only just Florida A&M alum, but I'd say anyone who loves college athletics, loves FAMU athletics, who loves HBCU athletics, Black college football, whoever and wherever you are, you got to go purchase this book. And I think after you read this book, you will want to go even find your way to the website where you can donate to the documentary. So I'm selling for you, Yanela. And listen here, I'm just rooting you on. Thank you.
I don't do a lot of things well, but I'm working here. So, you know, go to jakegaitherstory.com again. That's where you can support the documentary. I know we're about halfway there. We're about halfway finished with this documentary. So, you know, your support will really take us across that line, that finish line, at the level that we want it to be. So we're very grateful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your audience today. No, hey, look, I'm glad you again, through everything going on, as we're looking for content, I saw this and I was like, hey, this makes sense right now. You know, with everything going on with COVID-19 and pandemic and people talking about documentaries, and I think, look, we need to tell our story. I've had enough of seeing people comment about our stories and then want to go to other 4-letter networks and other people that don't look like you and me oh, hey, they should do this. No, they don't need to do, no, we should do this. And that's where this started. Because as soon as I read that, it's a whole nother post, a different topic. But anyway, I
Now,
read that.
if those fall letter stations want to fund us,
Yeah,
come on.
we'll take it, right? You'll take it, I'm sure. But it's like, look, there's a lot of stories, and you said it perfectly. We have to tell our stories because no one else will, and it doesn't matter. It won't mean anything to anyone else. It means something to us, and especially this day and age, we have the ability to share so much more with the use of technology. It's a great time for filmmakers, directors, producers like yourself and your team to be able to tell. There's a lot of great stories out there, and we got to help these kids. There's no way a student walking around Florida A&M University should not know who Jake Gaither is. Shame on you young I'm gonna say it. Shame on you young Rattlers for walking around and not know who Jake Gaither is.
Well, they won't know if we don't tell them. So that's on us. That's our responsibility. And that's what Coach Gaither would tell you. If you want something, you got to make it.
Amen. All right. Look, I appreciate your time. Is there anything that I didn't get to, anything that you want to say, or anything that you want to remind people of before we go?
No, not really. I think you've covered everything. I just thank you for the opportunity. You know, our HBCUs are replete with history. I mean, from the foundings to their purpose, their continued existence, and why we need them. And so, you know, I would just encourage anybody else who has a story that they want to tell to just get up and make it your first step. Even if you don't have a dime towards your project, you have people who are in your network who do things well that you can touch bases with. That's how I began this. I didn't have a nickel. I just had the opportunity to interview someone, and I called on people in my network to help me. And so we've gotten this far from that. And so don't let things deter you. Just make a step and make an effort, and you'd be surprised at the type of support that you will get. But, you know, I just thank you again for the opportunity to share this story, and looking forward to bringing it to the big screen.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Yanela McLeod, Changing the Game, the Jake Gaither Story is the documentary. JakeGaitherStory.com is the site. And of course, the book, Agile, Mobile, Hostile, the Biography of Alonzo S. Jake Gaither is the book. Yanela, thank you for your time. And we will be in touch. And let's go, folks. Let's get out and support this project, and let's go read this book, and let's support our own stories. So thank you again for your time. Take care. God bless. And we'll be in touch and following all the progress. All right.
Thank you so much. You stay safe.
All righty.
But you stay hard.